Hello and welcome to this Institute of Economic Affairs Free Market Forum discussion on the Conservative Party leadership race. The next leader of the party will be either Rishi Sunak, the former Chancellor who was the preferred candidate of members of Parliament during the parliamentary stage, and Foreign Secretary Liz Truss, who is, according to the most recent polls, the current favourite amongst members. With inflation expected to top 10%, a tax burden that is the highest in 70 years, and a cost of living crisis, there are a lot of areas for the next Prime Minister, whoever they might be, to institute the radical free market reforms that our economy needs. But who is likely to deliver these free market policies the best? Over this and another video, I'm delighted to be joined by two members of our Free Market Forum parliamentary supporters, who will be putting the case for their preferred candidate. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Buckingham MP Greg Smith. Greg, you've written a blog on the Free Market Forum website, which we'll link to in the description below, outlining the free market case for Liz Truss. Could you give us a short précis of why you see Liz as the best person to enact free market policies and take the country forward?
Thanks, Sam. I think there's three key reasons that I wrote about in that blog, and why I'm backing Liz Truss to be the next leader of the Conservative Party and the next Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. First of all, and it's a really important point to make, it's not necessarily a free market point to make, but if you're not in government, if you're not in control, then the left are going to win and we're going to have socialism across the board in Britain. And there's a point that Liz is a uniter. She's already bringing people from all wings of the party together, from Tom Tugendhat and Nuz Ghani to Bill Cash and Jacob Rees-Mogg and Ian Duncan Smith on the other end of the spectrum. And she's doing it through very much free market principles, classical liberal economics, and the party's coming together underneath that. And don't underestimate just how important it is for the party to unite on the 5th of September when the new leader is elected in that run-up, about a 2-year run-up to the next general election. The second point I'd make is the breadth of experience in government Liz has got. She's worked as a minister in 6 different government departments, including and critically Chief Secretary to the Treasury under the Theresa May government, where she actually proved herself to be a real cost cutter and a challenger to the blob, to the civil service, to the Treasury orthodoxy that we know holds back true free market policies in government all too often, even when ministers want to deliver them. But the third plank, and the most important one, which is why we're talking this afternoon, is her free market credentials. You don't have to look hard to see speeches before she was even considered a leadership contender, where she was her famous freedom fighters speech, for example, where she talks the language of lower taxes, a smaller state, freedom, giving people choice over their lives, setting business free to invest as they see fit, to grow the economy, to grow their enterprise, to employ more people. And you can see that through the policy platform she set out during this leadership election. I think I've said to you and to Mark Littlewood and others at the IEA in the past that I felt pig sick when we increased national insurance last year, when I had to go through the division lobby on a weak case as I look back. But I was convinced that the money was needed to clear the backlog, but actually it really grated with my principles to vote for it. And now actually I'm delighted that in the cold light of day, we can see that we can clear that backlog. We can get money into social care, but from existing budgets without increasing the tax burden. And Liz will reverse that national insurance increase. Likewise, she will pause the green levies that are so humongous now on all of our energy bills, keeping more money in individuals' back pockets, as well as saying we are not going to go ahead with Rishi's plan from when he was Chancellor to increase corporation tax. I know just how many small and medium-sized enterprises in my constituency are coming to my surgeries or saying to me when I visit them that they just about survived the pandemic. They've just about survived other financial earthquakes from the 2008 crash onwards, but putting in corporation tax up to 25%, going up to the level of France. They think that may well be the straw that breaks the camel's back. And if we're going to have a growing economy, if we're going to have jobs that are there to last, we need to ensure that businesses aren't facing these unacceptably high tax burdens, and they're set free to do what they do best: create great products or services, grow, employ people, and through that mechanism put money back into the exchequer to fund the public services everybody wants.
Yeah, I mean, there is obviously a lot to like in Liz's policy prospectus, but one of the pushbacks that we've seen a lot from people, even people on the who take a free market line, is the question of tax cuts versus sound money. Now we have government debt that's 103% of GDP. Isn't Rishi at least partially right that we should be concerned about the government's finances, and that perhaps, like Margaret Thatcher did when she first came to power, we should be concentrating on balancing the budget before we cut taxes?
Well, Liz's position, and she's been clear through the hustings on this, and I agree with her 100%, is that her plan is that we can't afford not to cut taxes now. People are feeling the squeeze in their back pockets, whether it's when they go to the supermarket, whether it's when their gas bill lands, whether it's at the petrol pumps, when they're filling the family car up to get the kids to school or to go to work. And likewise, businesses are suffering now and will suffer considerably if they see their share of taxation go up markedly, as it would if the Sunak plan to put corporation tax up to 25% goes ahead. So we can't afford not to get more money into people's back pockets. But equally, the Truss plan only pushes back paying the COVID debt back 3 years. So it's not like she's saying to hell with debt, as some like to paint her. It's not like she doesn't have a good, sound attitude to balancing the Treasury's books on weaning us off debt, bluntly. We've got to sort that out. But there's no chance of us being able to pay back that debt if we go into recession, as is predicted, as early as this autumn. If the economy has tanked, if we go into negative growth, if people are being laid off, if businesses are going bust, we've got no chance of balancing the Treasury's books whatsoever, because revenue will fall off a cliff. So Liz's plan is balanced, it is measured, it follows classical liberal economic principles that if you let people keep more of their money and keep businesses free to grow and invest, that's when revenue goes up into the Treasury, and that's when we'll be able to pay all this debt down.
And I'm glad that you mentioned people's gas bills, because obviously one of the big cost of living issues over the next, well, I mean, it's going to take years, obviously, to sort out the energy sector. But one of the short-term problems is going to be helping people to pay for their gas and energy bills over the next 6 to 12 months. Does Liz have a solution to that isn't just more tax, more spend, that allows people to keep more of their own money to pay off some of these bills rather than just using the state to sort it out?
Well, that's exactly what Liz has said. She's been clear that we don't know how much energy bills are going to go up, and she will look at it as it happens. But the principles, the underpinning of where she's coming from on this is all about letting people keep more of what they earn to meet the rising costs of food and of energy and of petrol and diesel. The key one amongst that for working people is the national insurance reversal. So that rise will get turned around, scrapped, no more. But also when it comes specifically to energy, she will suspend the green levies, which are about 25% of a lot of people's bills, because much as she agrees with decarbonisation, much as she is committed to the net zero project, she's been clear throughout all of these hustings. I heard her say it just down the road from my constituency in Wickham yesterday. You can't do that in a way that places the burden on individuals, that places an unacceptable burden on individual consumers. And so I think the biggest thing that anyone in this contest is promising is the suspension of those green levies, which I think will go an enormous way to getting the state out of the way, getting the bills down in the first place, and ensuring that people are able to heat their homes and cook and do all the things that we need energy to do in our individual households.
I mean, obviously, there's the long term as well. I know that I believe that Liz supports fracking. Is that correct? I mean,
yes.
Are there any other sort of more free market approaches to the energy sector that she's looking at?
So Liz has spoken a lot about fracking throughout the hustings. You're absolutely right to say that, increasing our domestic production of energy, something that I'm certainly keen to make the case for, and to see a Prime Minister Truss deliver on would be more nuclear energy production in the United Kingdom. I'm enormously excited by the SMRs, the small modular reactors that Rolls-Royce, for example, have developed. I think we need to be pressing the big go button on getting some of those built around the country and generating our own electricity from nuclear on these very small scale plants that, a single one of which can happily power entire towns and cities in their own right. I think we've got to be looking at greater domestic energy production from those sources that aren't globally impacted when horrendous things like the invasion of Ukraine happen.
One of the other slight concerns that I've seen people of a free market persuasion raise about Liz's economic perspectives is that there hasn't been much discussion about where she would cut spending. There's sort of good opportunities to go for growth, fantastic. Talking about cutting the tax burden, necessary, but those you also need to cut spending in order to firstly reduce the size of the state from where it is now, and secondly to make sure that these type of the other two promises are actually work going forward. Does Liz actually have any plans, do you think, to shrink the size of the state?
So if you look at some of the things that have been written, articles that have been produced over the course of this leadership campaign, Simon Clarke, who is the current Chief Secretary of the Treasury, who's on her campaign, has written about a spending review being kicked off almost straight away. I think it would be foolish for any leadership candidate to set out hyper detailed plans, because it's just not feasible to put that level of planning together until you're actually at the top table, until you've actually got control of the Treasury. And perhaps I could explain my confidence in her on this footing this way. In the last decade of British politics has largely been reactionary. There hasn't really been a philosophical underpinning to anything that's happened across the coalition government, across the May government, across the Johnson government. The coalition was entirely reactive to the 2008 crash, the austerity programme as it's become known. Since the referendum, politics has been dominated by, well, how do you deliver? I mean, for many years in Parliament, if you even could, but how we delivered on the 2006 decision to leave the European Union. In more recent times, it's obviously been reacting to the COVID pandemic and the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. I think we're actually at a crossroads in British politics where we can either carry on like that, or we can have a Prime Minister with that philosophical underpinning of the direction she will take British government, the way our country is governed. And if you go back to the freedom fighters speech, if you go to the things she's been saying in the hustings and on the separate events around different Conservative associations around the country, she is clearly talking the language of the way she will approach decision-making, being through that classical liberal, small state, low tax, freedom-loving approach that certainly got me into politics in the first place, and the IEA's work being in no small part of that. And that's where the confidence comes from. So I don't think any candidate would be wise, as I say, to set out detailed, I'll take 10% off this or 5% off that or whatever it might be, because of course you've got to look at it all through the lens of the spending review. But the confidence is there that for the first time, possibly since Margaret Thatcher, we could have a government with a proper philosophical underpinning.
And it's interesting that that Simon Clarke, I think, spoke at the IEA a few months ago, actually laying out the need for reduced government spending. So it is interesting that he's taking Liz's side on this. I want to go through a couple of other sort of obviously it's all the economy, but a few other policy areas. The big one, again, this isn't so much a policy area as much as a personal about a personal approach to things. Some people are quite concerned about the fact that she stayed in government right the way through. She stayed in government when Theresa May was, as some people saw it, selling Brexit out. She stayed in government when, as some people see it, Boris Johnson was not acting appropriately in that as Prime Minister. Do we think, is she actually, do you think, going to stand up for free market ideas, or is she sort of just saying what she needs to say in order to get elected?
No, I think there's a genuine belief there. And she's taken a lot of these things head on through the course of this campaign, going right back to the fact, the awkward fact that, she started a political career as a 17-year-old or whatever it was as a Liberal Democrat. Well, we all make mistakes in our youth. I never quite made that mistake, but we forgive her for that. But I think if you look over the course of the last 5 or 6 years, particularly since she was Chief Secretary under the Theresa May government, when she delivered that famous freedom fighters speech, she has been talking the language of free market economics. She has been talking the sort of language that I think you or I subscribe to for some years now. And actually, if you listen to some of the things she's been saying in the hustings, she's saying she was actually around the cabinet table pushing back on the national insurance increase. Clearly she lost that cabinet. I don't know whether it went to a vote or whether it's just a discussion. We'll never know what happens in cabinet for decades yet. But she was the one claiming to be pushing back on that, pushing back on some of the things that many of us have been uncomfortable with, decisions taken by the Johnson government, the May government, the Cameron government before that. And so I say, give her the chance to have that top seat at the table to prove it. And I've got a great deal of confidence that she will.
Right. I was, for my sins, in the audience for the Sky News debates held about a week or so ago. And they put a previous quote that Liz had made, that given about building on the Greenbelt, and asked her did she still believe building on the Greenbelt, and she said no, she changed her mind. Don't you think that building on the Greenbelt is a pretty important part of coming up with a free market solution to the housing crisis?
So, I mean, this is a hot potato in my constituency as well. And of course, we need to build homes in this country. That is an undeniable fact. But equally, when you look through the lens of the harm principle of free to do what you wish to do so long as you don't harm anyone else, I think there are a lot of communities, a lot of villages, a lot of rural areas that are feeling that actually they are being harmed by the loss of countryside, by the loss of agricultural land, by the loss of the great British landscape around them. And on top of that, where there has been significant house building, particularly on open green space, the infrastructure hasn't followed. So I think, as politicians, we are servants of the people, and where communities are crying out to say, we can't take any more house building in this village or this town or that town, we do have to listen to that. I think that's where that comes from with Liz. But she has equally acknowledged throughout this campaign the need to build, the need to focus on that brownfield land where it's almost criminal not to redevelop those sites that are crying out for regeneration or have fallen into disrepair and are just eyesores now. And equally, she's acknowledged that if we believe in local democracy, we should stop these Soviet-style top-down targets from central government that dictate to areas, you've got to build 4,000 homes, you've got to build 10,000 homes, you've got to build 100,000 homes, wherever it might be, because there is nothing democratic about that. There is nothing where actually you're meeting supply and demand about that. There are undoubtedly areas where housing is in much greater demand than others, yet it's often not the areas where that demand is so high that the supply is actually being built out. So her campaign is all about letting the communities decide what they need in a particular area, and to then, through the planning system, make it happen.
Moving very sharply from housing to health, Rishi has been, in my view, quite impressive on promising some at least limited changes to the National Health Service, bringing in, if not greater market mechanisms, then at least some kind of costs for people not turning up to appointments, for example, attempting to avoid wasted appointments, things like that. Is there anything that Liz is planning on that would push the National Health Service in a more free market direction?
So the National Health Service is clearly a part of the public sector that has had unprecedented increases in spending over recent years, part of that to do with the pandemic. But actually, before the pandemic even started, I think one of the first bits of legislation I had to vote on after my election in 2019 was giving a statutory underpinning to the increases in health spending. And what we've got to do is we've got to make sure that that money is being spent well, and that clinical outcomes are what fundamentally matter. So, are people getting seen? Are they getting whatever illness, disease they've got treated properly, cured, lives saved, or for some very serious diseases that don't have a cure, lives extended? That's where I think the focus has got to be. And yes, missed appointments are very annoying. They're very costly to the taxpayer. I'm not convinced a £10 penalty and the sheer scale of the cost of implementing and enforcing that £10 penalty is going to make the world of difference. It's certainly an idea that is worth looking at to see how it could be implemented. But the NHS needs more than a couple of gimmicks to ensure that it is saving lives and prolonging lives.
So the last policy area I want to look at is the online safety bill. As you know, it's a particular bugbear of mine and many other people at the IEA. Liz has said that it's important that we don't have censorship, but she doesn't seem to have any concrete changes that she's looking at introducing that will stop the worst impacts of the bill from affecting the economy and people's rights of free speech online. I was just wondering if you knew if she had any other plans on what the online safety bill might look like when if she has the opportunity to get it through Parliament.
So I'm not certain that there is a detailed plan on the online safety bill. There's a huge amount of concern on the Conservative benches about it. I think it is one of those pieces of legislation that personally speaking, as a backbench member of Parliament, I would like to have a set of fresh eyes over it. We saw the other day a suggestion that actually, as the bill is at the moment, it could completely undermine and challenge the very existence of WhatsApp. Well, that might be a good thing in Parliament, in the number of WhatsApp groups that we're in, but fundamentally, of course, it's not for free speech and freedom of expression and people being able to communicate with each other as they wish. So I personally think it does need a fresh set of eyes. Liz has been very clear that she doesn't agree with censorship, as you say, throughout this campaign. Let's get her into Downing Street. Let's get someone who, as I said earlier, is driven by that philosophical underpinning of free markets, of freedom, and see where we can go with it.
And of course, we'll have to make sure she gets a copy of the IEA's briefing on the online safety bill. Greg, thank you so much for speaking to us. Just before we finish up, membership ballots, most people should have had them by now. I haven't, which I think means I need to ring the number to find out where it's got to at this point. And obviously anybody who's watching who hasn't received their ballot yet should make sure they get in touch with Conservative Central Office. CCHQ as it's called now. But just as as members are voting, could you please give what your closing pitch on Liz's behalf would be to anybody who's watching this who is still yet to make up their minds?
Thanks, Sam. My closing pitch is very simple. Liz is the candidate with what I consider to be a really genuine, authentic, free market, conservative agenda for government, about a smaller state, lower taxes, freedom on an individual basis, and freedom to business to get on and do what they do and grow and get our economy growing. We needn't have a recession. We are slowly talking ourselves into one, but it doesn't have to be that way. And I think Liz has got the ideas to keep our economy going forwards, to ensure that the best days of the United Kingdom are still ahead of us. She's uniting the party. She's got people from all wings of it. She's got the breadth of experience in government. I think she is the right candidate to be our next Prime Minister.
Greg, thank you so much for joining me, for putting the free market case for Liz. For those of you watching, the Counterpoint video is going online at the same time on the IEA's YouTube channel and on the Free Market Forum website, with the Right Honourable Mark Harper putting the case for Rishi. If you'd like to see more content of this nature, please consider donating to the IEA's Patreon page, which we'll be linking to in the description below. And don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you very much.
Well, if you enjoyed that conversation, why not watch one of these other videos? And while you're here, remember to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. That way, you'll never miss out on a single IEA broadcast.